Good evening, friends. I welcome everyone to our 23rd study circle meeting. Today's topic is on legal remedies. Our resource person for today's session is our senior counsel, Mr. E. Om Prakash, a very nice and hardworking gentleman. I know him from the college days, and I know how much effort he will put for each matter. I'm sure that even for today's session, also he has worked hard, which we can utilize now. Now over to Senior Counsel, Mr. E. Om Prakash.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Suresh, for those nice words, which primarily because of our relationship you have said. I'm happy to be part of this session hosted by the study circle. It is in fact a different avatar for me because I had been part of the study circle in every other program. And today I am standing in a different pedestal to speak to you on a particular subject. It is in fact a very nice moment and happy moment for me to share some thoughts with you in this group. And I thank my friends who have been with me all along for having given me this opportunity of sharing my thoughts on a particular subject. Today's topic is legal remedies. Vi jus ibi remedium is a Latin maxim which we would have come across as students of law. The said legal maxim effectively means where there is a right, there is a remedy. All legal systems recognize this fundamental principle and paves way for remedies to its citizens by establishing courts of law for the administration of justice and granting reliefs. Now, as far as today's session is concerned, though I have said as legal remedies, we are not going to deal with any kind of criminal law remedies because that is a separate field by itself, which may be identical when we go through this entire session, but still I am not touching upon it because as you all know that I am not so expert in the criminal law. Why this topic, legal remedies, what actually it means? No, I put it to myself as a very layman, raising a question as to we hear different type of orders from different courts. One day there is a news that there is an order of a subordinate court, there is an order of a district court. The other day you get a news that somebody has approached a high court and seeking for a relief. And at times we also hear that petitions have been filed before Supreme Court seeking for certain reliefs for establishment of rights. So there should be some framework as to how these different courts set in at different points of time in granting reliefs. Now, when I say this, we are conscious of the fact there are hierarchy of the courts. We actually don't mean that if there is a decision which is rendered by the High Court and you file an appeal before the Supreme Court as a highest court and seek a remedy, without that hierarchy, without even there being a case before a lower court or high court, we hear that there are petitions which are filed before Supreme Court. So this is in the context I raised to myself a question as a layman as to what is this framework? How does this work? What is that the subordinate judiciary? What is that remedies before the High Court? What is the remedy before the Supreme Court? So I tried to find an answer for it and I thought I will share with my friends this thought and also hear from you as to whether this kind of reasonings is what ultimately the system functioning is. A legal remedy is nothing but a relief or a remedy we seek within the framework of justice delivery system. Now, for the purpose of this session, what I am attempting to do is that I am looking at these legal remedies under different classifications. In other words, I am looking at how we frame a relief. A client comes to you and he seeks for establishment of some right, or if there is a danger to extinguishment of right, or if there is a threat to his right being encroached upon by somebody. So therefore, he seeks your advice and he seeks that you have to work out a remedy for him. So in such cases, how do we frame these reliefs? It is on a basic, very, very basic understanding. I am not you based under the remedies contain three classifications. first instance, you can look at remedies which are called common law remedies. And at the second instance, you can look at remedies which are called statutory remedies. And finally, I'm going to just point out to you, there are remedies which are constitutional remedies. A remedy which is provided by the Constitution to its citizens. So this is broadly the framework of my talk today, as to try to understand what are common law remedies and look at what is a statutory remedy and then what is the constitutional remedy. When we speak about common law remedies, as a practitioners of law, we are required to decide on the remedy for the client, advise them on the relief which they can seek for, and also the forum which they have to approach. Now, a person who has a right seeks adjudication of this right or any breach arising of such right, which can be in the nature of a relief of compensation, damages, injunction, specific relief, etc. In simple terms, a person comes to you and says that I own a property, I have a particular boundaries to the property, particular extent is my ownership and possession of the property. I find that my neighbor or some third party who seeks to encroach upon it. Then he says, I want a relief for this. Then you think about the common law remedy, because no statute says that you have to file a suit for a specific performance, you have to file a suit for an injunction restraining somebody from doing it. But there is a right for you to have a ownership and possession of a property. So this you advise him that I can go to a civil court, file a suit and seek for a relief of an injunction. Then at times you may tell him that you may have to seek for a relief of a declaration of certain rights. So these are the framework by which if there is a right to a person to anything, he definitely has a remedy of such right. Now, earliest of this principle as to this legal maxim or a person having a right, which ultimately results in a remedy being provided, is found in the case of Ashby versus White of the year 1703, an English decision. The final decision was by the House of Lords. So there was an instance of a prevention to cast a vote in the election by an act of misfeasance by a constable, on the pretext that the person who was seeking to cast his vote is not a settled inhabitant and therefore he is prevented. Now this results in the action being brought before the court, and the judgment is Ashby versus White, reported in 1703-92 English Reports, page 126. This was one of the earliest cases which dealt at length as to the principle that if a person has a right, he has a remedy. A person has a right to cast a vote, therefore if that is prevented, yes, he can bring about an action to seek a remedy on that. Now with this, let us look into what kind of rights are the common rights which a person acquires or possesses or in the process of his enjoyment. The following are some of the common rights of a person which he seeks to enjoy or enforce. Right to a property, its enjoyment, its possession. Right to certain privileges, inheritance. Right arising under personal laws. Then right arising under contractual obligations. These are all very common things which every other person comes across and every other person possesses. And therefore, if there is any breach of this, and if there is any threat to these kinds of rights, you need to have a remedy. Now, these rights, which I said about right to a property, its possession, its enjoyment, or right to privileges, inheritance, or personal law, or contractual obligations, are regulated by statutes like Transfer of Property Act, Contract Act, our personal law, be it the Hindu law of succession or Hindu Marriage Act or Mohammedan law or the Indian Succession Act for the Christians, Specific Relief Act, Sale of Goods Act, Easements Act, etc. You can keep on adding n number of enactments which effectively regulate certain rights of the individuals. Now, these kinds of rights fall under the category of law, and the remedies which you seek for these rights is called common law remedies. This is the first chapter of our session, or first issue which we are looking at. Now, apart from this, there are statutes which the legislature brings about, either to regulate certain business, either to regulate certain activities of an individual. Now, these legislatures, these statutes of the legislature also provide for certain rights, and those statutes regulate those rights and in turn provide for specific remedies under the said statutes. Now, while the statutes provide for regulating certain rights or creation of rights and remedies under those statutes, it also states as to the forum which you have to approach to seek a remedy under that particular statute. These can be broadly termed as statutory remedies. You can get so many examples on that. As I take you through the session, we'll be able to understand that. So the second limb of this legal remedies discussion for the day is on statutory remedies. Now this brings to the third stage. So the Constitution of India under specific articles also provides for certain remedies to its citizens. And such remedies which are provided under the constitutional provisions can be termed as constitutional remedies. So this is the broad guideline as to the discussion for the day under the topic legal remedies. As I said, I am trying to categorize into common law remedies, statutory remedies, constitutional remedies. So this will explain as to where we seek for these remedies and how this system works as regarding these remedies. Now let us come to the common law remedies. Common law remedies is the regular reliefs we seek for on account of acts like trespass, encroachment, nuisance, negligence, acts arising, giving rise to tortious liability, breach of obligations under contract, etc. Now, these remedies are sought before the regular civil courts. We know the hierarchy of civil courts, starting from the district municip, the sub courts, district courts, and high court of a state. Now, the classic common law remedy is obtained by filing a civil suit in a proper civil court and seeking appropriate relief therein. Now, Code of Civil Procedure regulates the civil suits before the civil courts. Now, does it in any manner provide as to the power and jurisdiction of the civil court? It does. Section 9 of the Code of Civil Procedure defines the jurisdiction of a civil court in the following words. I will just read Section 9. Section 9 heading says, courts to try all civil suits unless barred. The courts shall, subject to the provisions herein contained, have jurisdiction to try all suits of civil nature, excepting suits of which their cognizance is either expressly or impliedly barred. So therefore, there is jurisdiction of a civil suit. What is the exception? Exception is that if there is a bar to such civil suit in some specific statutes, then the court entertains. If there is bar, every other suit is bound to be entertained by a civil court. Now, this has two explanations. Explanation 1 says, a suit is property. So therefore, a right to a property or to an office is contested. That is a suit of civil nature. Notwithstanding that, such right may depend entirely on the decision of questions as to religious rites or ceremonies. So even in religious ceremonies, if there are certain rights which are there, and if it is sought to be established, those are termed as suits of civil nature. This is explanation 1. Now, explanation 2 says, for the purpose of this section, it is immaterial whether or not any fees are attached to the office referred to in explanation 1, or whether or not such office is attached to a particular place. So this is again an explanatory to explanation 1. So therefore, this provision of the Code of Civil Procedure confers the jurisdiction of the civil courts to decide the civil suits unless the same is barred by a statute expressly or impliedly may not lie. If impliedly a statute says that a suit will not lie, then again there is a bar. Therefore, you cannot approach a civil court. Now, what does Supreme Court say about this Section 9 of CPC? In the case of Gangabai versus Vijay Kumar, reported in 1974 3 SCR page 882, the Honorable Supreme Court had observed these lines. I am just quoting the lines of the judgment. There is an inherent right in every person to bring suit of a civil nature, and unless the suit is barred by statute, one may, at one's peril, bring a suit of one's choice. So you can file any suit, you can frame any relief which you can. Only thing Supreme Court says is that at one's peril. So when the defendant comes about, then you will know whether your relief is to be considered or not, or relief is sustainable or not. So at one's peril, you can bring a suit of your choice. It is no answer to a suit, however frivolous the claim. It is no answer to a suit, however frivolous the claim, that the law confers no such right to sue. A suit for its maintainability requires no authority of law, and it is enough that no statute bars the suit. I think you will be able to get the point. So, case of common law remedies is on the principle that there is no law which confers a right to sue. Rather, as I said at the earlier point of time, if there is a right, you are entitled for a remedy. And if your remedy is able to be framed in such a manner that you can go before a civil court and seek for it. Now, there is one more judgment of the Supreme Court reported in the case of Dhanalal versus Katavabai and others. In 2002, Supplementary 1 SCR, page 19, which in fact relied the earlier judgment of Gangabai, which I referred, wherein the court held that plaintiff is dominus litis, that is, master of having domain over the case. He is the person who has carriage and control of an action. In case of conflict of jurisdiction, the choice ought to lie with the plaintiff to choose the forum best suited to him, unless there be a rule of law excluding access to a forum of a plaintiff's choice, or permitting recourse to a forum which will be opposed to public policy or will be an abuse of process of law. So therefore it says, in a case of common law remedy, in a case of civil suit, plaintiff is the dominant person. You decide. You have a choice. It cannot be said that you cannot elect a choice. What are the exceptions from the very same section which the Supreme Court reiterated is that if it is barred in law, if there is a rule of law which excludes access to a forum, then you cannot go for it. So these are some basic judgments which I thought I will just point out to you. So let us come to the issue of how the civil courts are established. What is the provisions? What is the regulatory mechanism? Now, Constitution of India provides power, and all being list 1 is there in the 7th schedule of the Constitution of India. Now, these lists, list 1 is the union list, list 2 is the state list, and list 3 is the concurrent list, is in terms of Article 246 of the Constitution of Academic Interest I am pointing out. Now, what is there within these entries? Is there anything relating to this establishment of civil courts? Now, union subjects are there in list 1, as I said, list 2, and state subjects in list 2 and concurrent in list 3. Now, I'll point out to the specific entries which are there as regarding this establishment of civil courts. In list 1, which is the union list, entry 95 says about jurisdiction and powers of courts except the Supreme Court with respect to any of the matters in this list and admiralty jurisdiction. Therefore, the center, the union has a power to establish courts vesting with jurisdiction and powers except the Supreme Court. That is because Supreme Court is established in the specific article of the Constitution. And with respect to the matters in this list, so this is concerning the list 1 of union. So where are areas where the union has a legislative power, you have a power to establish courts with such jurisdiction and powers. Now, similar to this, in list 2, entry 65 speaks about same words, jurisdiction powers of all courts except the Supreme Court with respect to any of the matters in this list. So therefore, in the matters concerning the state list under list 2, entry 65 provides for establishment of courts. Now, interestingly, in the concurrent list, list 3, there are 2 different entries. Entry 11A says administration of justice, constitution and organization of all courts except Supreme Court and High Court. So in so many words, the Constitution provides these rights for establishment of courts. Now under list T, there is one more entry, which is entry 46, which are identical to the earlier entries in the other list, namely jurisdiction powers of all courts except Supreme Court with respect to any of the matters in the list. So when in the case of union list, same words with admiralty jurisdiction. When in the case of state list, same word, and concurrent list, same word. In the concurrent list, you have one more item which comes by way of entry 11A. So these are the constitutional background as to the establishment of courts. Now, according to this, each state has its own civil courts acts which delineate the territorial and pecuniary jurisdiction of such courts. In Tamil Nadu, we have the Tamil Nadu Civil Courts Act 1873 and the Chennai City Courts Act 1892. We come across these enactments only at times when amendments come to these acts, when they change the pecuniary limits. As practitioners in Madras, we may be knowing that when the original jurisdiction of High Court is changed, there will be a corresponding amendment to the City Civil Code, vesting the jurisdiction with City Civil Code, which you know that at times was 1 lakh, then 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs. Likewise, before the subordinate courts, the pecuniary jurisdiction vested with the sub-judge, with the munsif and district is all decided by this enactment. So as and when this happens, it happens when there is an amendment to this act. Likewise, at times there may be amendments in terms of territorial jurisdiction. So these, in terms of the constitutional provisions, in terms of the entries, states vested with legislative, therefore by virtue of legislative powers, acts come into place establishing the civil courts. Because we are talking about the common law remedies. Now, is there anything on the question of this? A question as to the virus of such City Civil Court Act of Bombay came up for consideration before the Honorable Supreme Court in one of the earliest decisions as early as in 1950. Now, interestingly, at the time when that case was considered before the Supreme Court, Constitution was not in place. But the earlier government, 1935, was in place. So, question was whether the Bombay legislature can pass an act of City Civil Court concerning certain pecuniary and territorial jurisdiction of the Bombay civil courts. So this was disputed. The virus of the act was questioned, saying that whether the state has power, whether the center has power. Therefore, identical to the earlier 3 entries which I referred, which are found place in the Constitution of India, there were entries in the Government of India Act 1930. In fact, there entries were, entry 1 was concerning the administration of justice or establishment of courts. So therefore, Supreme Court had an occasion to deal with this. It's a very interesting judgment. Very important area which I found is that this is a judgment by a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court. Each of the judges have rendered a judgment. You read the judgment, you will find each of them. Though they say we are concurring with the ultimate view that these appeals have to be allowed and the decision of the High Court of Bombay has to be set aside, but they had rendered a judgment by themselves. Now, this case is called State of Bombay versus Nurse Jetabai, reported in AAR 1951 SC page 69. Now, I am only just academical purpose as to how these courts are established. I pointed out whether there was any issue. So I just took you to one of the earliest judgments. Now, let us see the nature of common law remedies which we seek before these civil courts. They are in the nature of declaratory reliefs. You may ask for a declaration of title. You may ask for a declaration that certain things are wrong. You may ask for a declaration to declare a document as null and void or declare certain acts as null. Then there are injunctive reliefs, then recovery of possession, specific performance, compensation and damages. So these are all the nature of common law remedies which you seek before the civil courts. Now, depending on the right to be established, any one of this remedy is sought in a civil suit. As the Supreme Court, Honorable Supreme Court had held, which I referred to the earlier judgment, it is no answer to a suit, howsoever frivolous the claim, that the law confers no such right to sue. Therefore, you cannot defend a suit saying that there is no law conferring you to initiate such a, file such a suit or sue for such a nature. This is the touchstone of a common law remedy. So therefore, it flows out of a right which is inherent with you. As a right is there, you need a remedy. Therefore, the common law courts came into existence. And only regulation was regarding the procedures or regulations were regarding the reliefs which you can. Now, having said this, I need to point out that such reliefs under common law remedies are regulated to some extent by the provisions of specific relief act law of limitation, and so forth. Interestingly, under the saving provisions under Section 3 of Specific Relief Act, it is stated that nothing in the Specific Relief Act shall be deemed to deprive any person of any right to relief other than specific performance under a contract. So, other than specific performance under contract, there cannot be any deprivation of a right to sue. The Act further sets out the remedies which are in the nature of recovery of possession. As you all know that Specific Relief Act by specific provision says that what kind of recovery of possession which you can seek and what is the time limit within which you have to seek for such recovery of possession. Then it speaks about specific performance in cases of breach of contractual obligations, relief in the nature of specific performances. You all know that till 2018, this relief of specific performance was only discretionary. The court itself said, the Act itself said it is an equitable remedy at the discretion of the court, which can be considered if there is no opportunity for awarding a compensation. But there is a major amendment which has come to the Specific Relief Act, which now takes out the position that these reliefs are mandatory. What are the other reliefs which the Specific Relief Act speaks about is injunctive reliefs, either it is preventive or in the nature of mandatory. Then restoration reliefs and recompensates relief and perpetual injunctions which you can seek for. So all these things are regulated. I am not taking you through these provisions because ultimately within the time which is available to us, I am looking at a kind of thought process to be developed so that we get into those areas and try to find out for ourselves. So therefore, this is on the common law remedies, a relief before the civil courts being a bread and butter for a lawyer. I am not going to say much on it because day in and day out, you have opportunities to handle the civil suits. Suffice to say that the common law remedies form the basis of legal remedies at the first instance. Now, having said this, let us come to the second stage. Now, second area which I said as regarding legal remedies is statutory remedies. Now, statutory remedies arise from the fact that law confers the right to sue, which is in contradiction to the law remedies where you find that there is no requirement of a law to confer a right to sue. It is a right which is there, and in terms, it leads to a remedy which you can seek. Now, it is different as far as statutory remedies are concerned. Now, these rights, these remedies under statutes flow from specific statutes which define certain rights, which regulate certain rights, and therefore provide specific remedies under the statutes. Now, such remedies under the statutes may again vest the jurisdiction with a civil court or create special courts, tribunals to grant such reliefs. Because there are certain, take the case of land, land is that we seek specific remedy under the enactment by approaching a civil court. This you have seen there are so many within statutory remedies. Now, what are all the laws broadly which you can look at where these statutory remedies are created? Remedies which specific rights and specific reliefs which you can have are, take the examples of land tenure enactments, acts relating to estates abolition, right war, etc., which are the oldest enactments. Then take the case of rent control legislations. Every other state had a rent control legislation regulating the rights between the landlord and tenant. Now, in the process of regulation, these enactments provided reliefs which are within the framework of the law. You cannot speak about a common law remedy there. You cannot say that I will ask for an injunction against a landlord. Such reliefs under the statutes. Then you have land acquisition laws, you have labor legislations, industrial disputes legislation. At the point of time when the industrializations happened in a fast manner, when the liberalization of the economy happened, you have very many special economic laws like basic tax laws. Take the case of sales tax, income tax, everything. Then debt recovery laws which came into place, insolvency laws which were there and which has taken a new avatar in the terms of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. Then you had consumer protection, intellectual property rights like Copyrights Act, Patents Act, trademarks, environmental laws like prevention, air prevention, environmental protection. So there are very many enactments which brought about specific rights being regulated, which provided specific remedies to be provided, and the forums for which you have to approach. So these are all within the framework of statutory remedies. Now, as part of the statutory remedies, you have in fact find establishment of tribunals, either administrative tribunals or tax recovery tribunals or tribunals dealing with economic offences like PMLA, SEBI, and establishment of special courts. So these are all very many areas where your specific statutory remedies lie. Now, very interesting as far as this aspect is concerned, because these statutory remedies at times bar the remedy under civil law. Therefore, I took you at the first instance of a common law remedies, then statutory. Let us see some small niceties as regarding statutory remedies. Now, in the statutory remedies, primarily what we see is that rights being provided, recognized, and regulated under statutes. The enactments provide for the rights of the parties, it regulates its exercise, and it also regulates enforcement of such rights. Then it speaks about remedies delineated within the framework of law. The remedies in respect of exercise or breach of such rights under these special laws are set out under the very same statute. And while doing so, the laws sometimes read into or refer to enactments for the purpose of procedure. As I said, like Land Acquisition Act said that ultimate remedy can be only before a civil court, but within the framework. And every other special statute you will find say that provisions of CPC will not apply, but certain areas, take the case of taking evidence, summoning, enforcing, it will again provide that provisions of CPC will apply. This you would have seen in every other enactment. So therefore, the remedies are delineated, procedures are provided. Certain acts, you can even see that procedures are self-made. They are a code by itself. Then you cannot even look back to the other things. Then very interestingly, these special statutes will provide bar of jurisdiction. Any specific remedy which you are looking at, if it is within the ambit of a law, then you have to see for whether there is a bar of remedy. Most of these laws which provide specific remedies contain a provision which bars the jurisdiction of civil court in respect of relief which is within the jurisdiction of such courts or tribunals or within the framework of such law. So therefore, there will be a specific bar of remedies. This is the bar which we saw when we spoke about common law remedies, which said under section 9 of CPC, unless there is a bar under statute, you have a right of filing a civil suit. Now, one bar set taking a different shape, it doesn't go to a civil court, it is not within your common law, it comes statutory provisions. Now, these statutes will also establish forums to seek such remedies, which you are aware, I don't need to explain to you as to n number of forums which have come. Take the case of Rent Control Acts, take the case of industrial tribunals, take the case of labor courts, take the case of family courts, debt recovery tribunals, national company law tribunals. So these are all forums which are created pursuant to the statutes. Now, there is also an incidental academical interest which you can look at is that tribunals are pursuant to an amendment to the Constitution itself. Constitution enabled establishment of tribunals. Then specific tribunals under special statutes. Then these special statutes, the remedies, statutory remedies which fall within the framework of the statute also provide for remedies of appeals. So therefore, the appeal remedies under the statutes are also guided and are in terms of the appellate forums which are recognized under the said statute. In many cases, there is no further appeal remedy apart from the appellate tribunal created under the statute. Therefore, you will not even get an appeal remedy to the High Court. But of course, certain statutes vest with certain powers of revision, review, and reference to the High Court. Take the case of, again, I'm falling back to the Rent Control Act. You have a specific provision of approaching the High Court by way of a revision. Take the case of tax statutes, sales tax or income tax, where there are provisions to approach the High Court by way of a reference. So apart from these limited exercises, most of the statutes you will find the remedies end with an appeal remedy before an appellate tribunal, and that is the end of it. There is no further. There are some statutes which have come up in these special areas, which interestingly pointed a remedy of appeal, provided a remedy of appeal to the Honorable Supreme Court bypassing the High Court. Cases like Consumer Protection Act, SEBI, IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, where you can find there the first forum for adjudication is the NCLT, an appellate forum in the nature of NCLAT, and thereafter an appeal to the Supreme Court. So interesting areas as regarding the statutory remedies are, these are the things which we have to find for ourselves. At the first instance, you will find many statutes, like the case of DRT and SURFACE Act. The appeal remedy is only up to the appellate tribunal. That is the end of it. The Act does not recognize anything beyond that. You don't have a right of appeal to High Court, or you don't have a right of appeal to Supreme Court, even on the question of law. But in certain statutes, it says that on a specific question of law, you can file an appeal. And interestingly, these appeals are provided to Supreme Court. This is the trend which is now going, which you can take it as a kind of march of law which is happening. Now, salient features of the statutory remedies is the bar of jurisdiction of civil courts, which is the common law remedy before the civil courts, as I said earlier. Now, all these special statutes which create a law on special subjects are always tested as to its virus, as to its applicability or the constitutional validity. And once the Supreme Court upholds the constitutional validity, the acts take its place in the society. So therefore, whenever we look at remedies which are falling within the statutory framework, as I said, the statutory remedies, it would be impediment for us to look into such decisions which uphold the law, which will give you a side view of how the law has been dealt with. As you are aware, certain statutes, when it had been upheld, certain provisions were declared as ultra vires the Constitution, which gives rise for amendments. Then certain provisions where Supreme Court or High Court expressed that it has to be reconsidered, therefore it gives place to an amendment. So these decisions which uphold the statutes act as a guidance for the remedy which we have to seek. Now, be it whatever the statute may provide, the statutory remedies necessarily have to conform to the due process of law as well as adhere to the principles of natural justice. This is an underlying principle. Now, these two principles have been read into every other scheme of special statutes by the laws laid down by the High Court or Supreme Court. The High Court as well as Supreme Court, either at the time of testing the virus or at the time of testing decisions which have been rendered under the statutes by tribunals, reiterate the point that there cannot be a bypass to the following of principles of natural justice. So this gives the second area of statutory remedies, which are different from the common law remedies. Now let us now look into the third area of the constitutional remedies. Now, constitutional remedies are those remedies which are specifically contained in Article 32, 136, 226 and 227 of the Constitution of India. Two of these articles relate to the power exercised by the High Courts, and two other articles are the powers exercised by the Honorable Supreme Court. To understand these remedies, when I said constitutional remedies, it is not based on any statute, it is not based on common law. Constitution recognizes certain rights. Therefore, if there is a breach of such rights, if there is a challenge to those rights, if there is a question regarding enforcement of that rights, Constitution directly provides you a remedy. Invoking those remedies, you have to seek the relief before either the High Court or the Supreme Court. To understand these remedies, it is essential that the framework of Constitution as to the individual's rights needs to be looked into. I am not taking you too deep into the constitutional provisions. Suffice for us to just have a small look at Part 3 of the Constitution of India, which speaks about fundamental rights. From Article 12 to Article 35 are part of this Part 3 on the fundamental rights guaranteed to the citizens of this country. Now, epitome of this Part 3 is Article 32, which provides for enforcement of rights conferred under this part. And such enforcement is before the Supreme Court. Let me read Article 32. Remedies for enforcement of rights conferred by this part. The right to move the Supreme Court by appropriate proceedings for the enforcement of rights conferred by this part is guaranteed. So therefore, a constitutional remedy is also a guarantee given to the citizen as part of the fundamental rights guaranteed under Part 3 of the Constitution. So therefore, sub-article 1 says it clear that enforcement of the rights conferred by this part is guaranteed. How it is guaranteed? By appropriate proceedings with a right to move the Supreme Court. Now, sub-article 2 says, the Supreme Court shall have power to issue directions or orders or writs, including writs in the nature of habeas corpus, mandamus, prohibition, quo warranto, and certiorari, whichever may be appropriate for the enforcement of any of the rights conferred by this part. Now, under sub-article 2, they make it very clear. Now, the powers of Supreme Court in granting a relief or remedy under 32 is by way of issuing prerogative writs. And they also set out what are the nature of writs which the Supreme Court can. Now, let us read sub-article 3. Without prejudice to the powers conferred on the Supreme Court by clauses 1 and 2, Parliament may by law empower any other court to exercise within the local limits of its jurisdiction all or any of the powers exercisable by the Supreme Court under subclause 2. So therefore, there is also a delegation which says the legislature can bring in legislation conferring such powers to such other justice administration system also. Then clause 4 says the right guaranteed by this article shall not be suspended except as otherwise provided for by this constitution. So this is article 32. So at the first instance, a constitutional remedy to a citizen is provided by article 32 to enforce, to establish your fundamental rights of part 3 of the constitution. Now, is there any such right on the High Court? Yes, the constitution provides for all a right on the High Court also. High courts are also vested with rights to enforce the fundamental rights conferred under our part 3 of the constitution. Now, article 226 of the constitution provides for the same. Now, let me read article 226. Subclause 1 says, notwithstanding anything in article 32. So therefore, this power of a High Court under article 226 is notwithstanding anything in article 32. Every High Court shall have powers throughout the territories in relation to which it exercises jurisdiction to issue to any person or authority, including in appropriate cases any government within those territorial territories, directions, orders, or writs, including writs in the nature of habeas corpus. So as I read this, you would have by now understood the limited scope of article 32, which only said at the first subclause that it is guaranteed by appropriate relief. At the second clause, it said by issuing writs. When we come to article 226, you can find the vastness of this, because it says in relation to which it exercises jurisdiction to issue to any person or authority, including in appropriate cases any government within those territories, directions, orders, or writs, including writs in the nature of habeas corpus, mandamus, prohibition, quo warranto, and certiorari, or any of them, for the enforcement of any rights conferred by part 3, and the further words are more important, and for any other purpose. This and for any other purpose you would not have found in article 32. 226 is wider enough. Now, second clause of article 226 says that the power conferred by clause 1 to issue directions, orders, or writs to any government authority or person may be exercised by the High Court exercising jurisdiction in relation to territories within which the cause of action wholly or part arises for the exercise of such power. So this provision enables the High Court to exercise power if in case there is a cause of action, though it may not be within the realm of a state legislature or anything. Then there is again a subclause 3 which speaks about interim orders. We may not have much concern as far as this session is concerned. Therefore, I will not touch upon subclause 3. Then subclause 4 says, the power conferred on the High Court by this article shall not be in derogation of the powers conferred on the Supreme Court by clause 2 of article 2. So, two specific provisions, one vesting with the High Court and the other vesting with the Supreme Court, provide the constitutional remedy. Article 226, the Supreme Court and High Court possess the power to issue prerogative writs for the enforcement of it. Seen from the articles itself, the writs are in the nature of, which I read to you, a certiorari, habeas corpus, quo warranto, mandamus, prohibition. As practitioners of law, as lawyers with some experience, we all know there is a huge court and huge jurisprudence in respect of each of these petitions. We will handle with it by exception. We may not have time to get into each of this. Suffice for me to just point out that these are the nature of writs. Now, issuance of writs by the Supreme Court and High Court is in the exercise of power of judicial review. That this is the touchstone. The basis of judicial review under these writs generally is the doctrine of ultra vires. So when we say the Supreme Court and High Courts are vested with this power and there is a remedy, constitutional remedy given to the citizen, what is the nature of power they exercise? That the jurisprudence evolves as a power of judicial review, reviewing the actions of the state and its people. On what guidelines they do? They test on the doctrine of ultra vires, whether it confirms the constitutional provisions and principles or it is against that. So therefore, this judicial review, while issuing the writs, is in exercise or on the touchstone of doctrine of ultra vires. Now, the power of judicial review is exercised when the following grounds exist. Now, when this power of judicial review is exercised? It is exercised when there is an abuse of power. Ultimately, it is towards providing you a remedy to protect your fundamental rights. Now, how is to be exercised and where it has to be exercised? What are the grounds of basis? This you would have seen whenever we file a writ petition, we make out these grounds that there is an abuse of power is one. Then excess of jurisdiction. A jurisdiction which is not vested is exercised by a party, which in turn affects your fundamental right. Then lack of jurisdiction. Then error of law apparent on the face of record. Then no legal evidence in case of finding of fact. If any order or if any other proceedings are being a subject matter of challenge within this constitutional remedy, and if it involves a finding of fact, the area which you can look at is that you may have to establish that there is no legal evidence in case of such finding of fact. All other things are on the question of law. Abuse of power, excess of jurisdiction, lack of jurisdiction, or error of law apparent on the face of law. Now, the court review finding of fact only on such rare grounds as when the finding is perverse or there is no legal evidence, that is lack of evidence to support it. Otherwise, you are all aware that questions of fact are normally not the subject matter of constitutional remedies. Now, there is one more area of this remedy provided under the Constitution by where we seek for the writ of prerogative writs of the Supreme Court and High Court. Now, all acts of Parliament and state legislatures are bound to be within the framework of Constitution of India and are bound to follow the principles laid down therein and cannot be in violation of the provisions of Constitution. This is a very basic thing. Now, if these laws which are made by the state legislature or central legislature are in breach of fundamental rights guaranteed to the citizens, then your remedy steps in by way of invoking Article 226 or Article 32. And therefore, apart from the enforcement of fundamental rights guaranteed is validity of various laws, validity of various statutes. Now, any challenge to an enactment is tested on certain principles enshrined in the Constitution. So you can only test it that showing that, as I said, various fundamental rights are there. Take the case of right to freedom, right to education. So there is an enactment which seeks to take away this right to freedom or right to education. Then you question it and you point out that the principles enshrined in the Constitution is being breached by this enactment. Thus, the virus of the act can be questioned under the said two articles. Now, such challenges to the laws of the land, actions of the executive, or orders of the state authorities are tested on certain doctrines and principles of interpretation. When I speak about these constitutional remedies, I only thought that a broad view also has to be given, because we get to hear so many lectures, suddenly some doctrines are spoken to. Even when we read some judgments, we find the entire judgment would have gone on only a principle or a doctrine. Well, why is that? So therefore, the challenges to these acts, when the virus of these laws are tested, why the actions of the executive or the orders of the state authorities are tested, these are tested on certain doctrines and principles of interpretation. These are the tools in the hands of an advocate as part of his advocacy in approaching the court. You would have heard about stalwarts in the legal profession who had taken up these tools and tried to get remedies before. That is how very many constitutional judgments came, very many constitutions on the principles relating to amendment to the Constitution, or disturbing or going against the very basic principles of the Constitution led to various judgments which you had opportunity to go through. This were brought in before the Supreme Court or High Court on the basis of these tools of interpretation or doctrines by advocates like us. Now, when I said about Article 32 and 226, I also certainly pointed out that there is a huge difference. Now, let us see what is that Article 32 and 226. The difference in powers exercised under Article 32 and Article 226 is a seminal point in many decisions. Though both articles provide the constitutional remedy for enforcement of fundamental rights guaranteed under Part 3 of the Constitution, there is a paramount difference in the power to be exercised and the scope of jurisdiction, which I pointed out when I read the articles itself. Now, as I said, Article 32 states that the Supreme Court shall have power to issue directions or orders or writs. The words used is that for the enforcement of any rights conferred by this part. It ends with that. Now, while in Article 226, it states the High Court shall have power to issue directions or writs for the enforcement of any of the rights conferred by Part 3 and for any other purpose. And within that scope of any other purpose, you would have seen directions, orders against authorities, against state, all those things are. Therefore, a wide understanding is that the High Courts have wider power for any purpose apart from the enforcement of any right conferred by Part 3. As such, the powers of High Courts under 226 is wider enough than the powers of the Honorable Supreme Court under Article 22. Now, is there any other remedies, constitutional remedies, which are there, which we can seek before the High Courts or Supreme Courts? One thing which you can look at as far as the High Courts is concerned is that the very pertinent article of Article 227, which comes next to Article 226. The High Court, apart from exercising powers under Article 226 in issuing this, over superintendents over the subordinate courts. This, which is provided under Article 226, 227, is also one more vast provision. This superintendence extends to the subordinate judiciary, subordinate tribunals, and very many areas which you can find from many judgments. I don't want to trouble you reading through Article 227. Suffice to say that it provides the power to the High Court to exercise superintendence over all courts and tribunals. Without prejudice to the generality, it enables the High Court to call for returns from the courts, to make and issue general directions, rules, prescribe forms. So all rule-making power or all, it also says that to prescribe books, nature of books, which you call the civil courts maintain, the entries, accounts, everything is all within the provisions of Article 227 by the High Court. Then, so therefore, one more constitutional remedy. Now, while I speak about Article 227, we are also conscious, which was in fact a part of my lecture in another session on the revisional jurisdiction. A revisional jurisdiction which is provided under the CPC against orders of civil courts, against orders of subordinate courts, has been restricted to some extent. It has been brought by way of an amendment restricting the powers of the revision. So there the Supreme Court stepped in and said that though Section 115 of CPC may not provide a revision in certain cases of orders, Article 227 steps in. Therefore, one major difference you can look at is Article 227 will give a power of High Court to exercise suo moto. Article 227 will also enable a litigant to petition the High Court by way of a CRP or by way of an exercise of revisional jurisdiction against orders of subordinate or against. You commonly would have come across petitions where under Article 227 you even seek to struck down a plaint before a subcourt. Though there are provisions of the CPC which seeks to reject the plaint, there are cases of striking down the plaint as a whole, striking down the suit from the record. So therefore, the difference as far as 226 and 227 is that 226 you have to petition, seek a relief by way of writs, which is wide enough. Then 227 can be exercised suo moto or by a petition of the parties. So this is one remedy, constitutional remedy under the before the High Court. Now, what are the other remedies before the Supreme Court? The Honorable Supreme Court, apart from exercising power under Article 32 for the enforcement of fundamental rights, is also vested with the power to interfere with any judgment, decree, determination, sentence, etc. by way of a special leave. This is the common thing which we hear as special leave petition filed before the court. As I said, the civil courts move with an hierarchy, like from the municip to the sub-court to district court and an appeal to the high court. You are aware that a first appeal and second appeal, at the most is the second appeal before the high court, which is on substantial question of law and it rests. So therefore, likewise, I said, under special statutes, tribunals are courts which have an appellate remedy, and with that it ends. As against these decisions, when there is substantial injustice rendered, high courts interfere under Act 226. And as against these decisions, including a decision under second appeal, if there is substantial further question, there is no appeal remedy, but still the Supreme Courts can entertain those petitions under this Article 136 by way of a petition seeking special leave. Now, what is the consequences of this petition? If this special leave which you seek before the Supreme Court is granted, your petition becomes an appeal before the Supreme Court. Either it is a criminal appeal or a civil appeal. So therefore, Article 136 provides for the same a kind of a constitutional remedy and is one of the discretionary reliefs in the administration of justice. Today, the maximum litigation before Supreme Court is on this Article 136. I will just point out one or two judgments of Supreme Court as to how Supreme Court sees this Article 136. I will also read the article, Article 136, special leave to appeal by the Supreme Court. Notwithstanding anything contained in this chapter, the Supreme Court may, in its discretion, grant special leave to appeal from any judgment, decree, determination, sentence, or order in any cause or matter passed or made by any court or tribunal in the territory of India. Please see the vastness of this provision. Nothing in clause 1 shall apply to any judgment, determination, sentence, or order passed or made by any court or tribunal constituted by or under law relating to armed forces. So, only exception for Article 136 is the decisions of armed forces tribunals. Now, in the case of Surya Kala versus Mohandas and others reported in 2007, 9 SEC, page 196, Supreme Court explained the scope of Article 136 in the following words. Article 136 was never meant to be an ordinary forum of appeal at all, like Section 96 or even Section 100 CPC. Under the constitutional scheme, ordinarily the last court in the country in ordinary cases was meant to be the High Court. The Supreme Court as the apex court in the country was meant to deal with important issues like constitutional questions, questions of law of general importance, or where grave injustice had been done. If the Supreme Court entertains all and sundry kinds of cases, it will soon be flooded with a huge amount of backlog and will not be able to deal with the important questions relating to the Constitution or the law, or where grave injustice has been done, for which it was really meant under the constitutional scheme. After all, the Supreme Court has limited time at its disposal, cannot be expected to hear every kind of dispute. This is one view of Supreme Court reported in a case of 2007, 9 SCC 196. It was also expressed by Supreme Court in an earlier decision reported in AR 91 SC 1675, where the Supreme Court said it should not hesitate to interfere in cases where the decision of the lower court will lead to miscarriage of justice. Now, in the case of Gopal and others versus State of Tamil Nadu, which went from our High Court, reported in AR 1986 SC 702, it was held that unless there is any infirmity or any illegality in the order of the lower court, or that it would lead to a failure of justice, the court should not interfere by exercising its discretion jurisdiction, Article 136. I am only pointing out one or two judgments just to provoke a thought process as regarding this constitutional remedy under Article 136. Now, the other article of the Constitution which goes with 136 is Article 142, which you would have come across many a time. Supreme Court says that I am passing this order by exercising the power under Article 142. Now, a great plenary power in the form of Article 142 provides for doing complete justice by the Supreme Court. This is the words which is there in the article itself. Now, let us see Article 142. Enforcement of decrees or orders of Supreme Court or orders as to discovery, etc. This is the heading. Now, the Supreme Court in the exercise of its jurisdiction may pass such decree or make such order as is necessary for doing complete justice in any cause or matter pending before it, and any decree so passed or order so made shall be enforceable throughout the territory of India in such manner as may be prescribed by or under any law made by the Parliament, and until provision in that behalf is so made in such manner as the President may by order prescribe. It is in fact the power of the Supreme Court to make law. Though the provision would say that it is a decision in the nature of a decree for the purpose of complete justice, but the wordings which you would have seen that any law which is laid down by Article 142 will be binding on all courts to be followed throughout the territory of India. What it says, until provision that you have, this article is of various nature. Mainly, if I can point out, I can refer to Vinit Narayan's case where special investigation was part of order of the Supreme Court, and the case of Visakha, where in absence of protection for women in the workplace, Supreme Court laid down guidelines. Much later, the law stepped in. So therefore, this is one article. Now, subsection 2 of Article 142 says, subject to the provisions of any law made in this behalf by Parliament, the Supreme Court shall, as respects to the whole territory of India, have all and every power to make any order for the purpose of securing the attendance of any person, the discovery or production of any documents, or the investigation or punishment of any contempt of itself. A very vast provision, which is, in my point of view, one more constitutional remedy available to the citizens. So this is in the nature of, now these provisions and the power being exercised by the Supreme Court is in the nature of corrective measures for balancing conflicting interests of the parties before the court. As I said, this has grown much wider, where Supreme Court stepped in to even put in certain guidelines and principles in the nature of legislation. Now, it is an inherent power and jurisdiction for dealing with extraordinary situations. The law on Article 142 was well summed up by the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Lakshmidas Morarji versus Behroz Dharam Madan, reported in 2009-10 SCC 425 in the following words. I will read that portion of the judgment. Article 142 being in the nature of residuary power, based on equitable principles, the courts have thought it advisable to leave the powers under the article undefined. The power under Article 142 of the Constitution is a constitutional power and hence not restricted by statutory enactments. Though the Supreme Court would not pass any order under Article 142 of the Constitution, which would amount to supplanting substantial law applicable or ignoring express statutory provisions dealing with the subject, at the same time, these constitutional powers cannot in any way be controlled by any statutory provisions. Please see the manner in which the words are being dealt with. At one hand, they say that by exercising power in 142, we will not supplant substantial law. But at the other hand, it also says still it cannot be controlled by any statutory provision. However, it is to be made clear that this power cannot be used to supplant the law applicable to the case. This means that acting under Article 142, the Supreme Court cannot pass an order or grant relief which is totally inconsistent or goes against the substantive or statutory enactments pertaining to the case. The power is to be used sparingly in cases which cannot be effectively and appropriately tackled by the existing provisions of law, or when the existing provision of law cannot bring about complete justice between the parties. Now, any constitutional remedy sought, either for enforcing fundamental rights or deciding the virus, the same is decided on certain rules, doctrines, and principles, which are seen as tools of interpretation, which I also referred to in the earlier part of this. Now, these rules of interpretation, I'm just trying to put it across widely certain things. It is not the hard and fast strict jacket rule. But these are seen as basically 4 rules, which is a literal rule, then a golden rule, then a mischief rule, and a purposive interpretation. The rules of interpretation, while dealing within the power of judicial review by the Supreme Court, in granting you a constitutional remedy, in exercise of the powers, in exercise of the articles which I have said, the test will be on the basis of, take the case of mischief rule, how that is applied. If you are testing an enactment, if you are testing a order, or if you are testing a proceedings, what is looked to be seen is that what is the mischief it wanted to undo. If a provision of a law was with an object to undo a mischief which is being caused in the society. Then you apply this mischief rule and say, if that purpose is solved, then act is valid. If it does not undo the mischief, then it is not valid. So therefore, these are all certain rules. I'm just pointing out, as I said, literal rule, which in fact is what literally there in the statute. The court says you read it, and on the plain understanding of what it brings out is the law. Then golden rule, then mischief rule, then purposive interpretation. Now, likewise, there are certain doctrines which are being applied while testing this. When we are seeking constitutional remedies, and when the virus of acts are tested. These are doctrine of pith and substance, doctrine of harmonious construction, doctrine of colorable exercise, doctrine of eclipse, doctrine of severability, etc. In this armor of tools to an advocate, as you look forward, there are very many which have now joined. As you have heard in one of the sessions of our own study circle, Mr. K.V. Vishwanath, senior advocate, pointed out that manifest arbitrariness is one of the tools on which the courts are seeking to rely. So it is also a tool for the purpose of judicial review adopted by the Supreme Court, and he referred to the Saira Banuka's case and pointed out how the Supreme Court handled this manifest arbitrariness by pointing out to the earlier judgments. Then one another most important doctrine which has been derived, when I said about all these doctrines, something would have come to mind, at least a few of you, that I have not said about doctrine of basic structure. This doctrine of basic structure is derived as a result of the celebrated judgment in Keshavananda Bharati case versus State of Kerala, reported in 1973, 4 SCC 225. Many of my friends had been often telling me, what is the understanding of law, or what is the Keshavananda Bharati? And there is a big history behind this judgment as to much earlier judgments. Broadly, if you look at the constitutional judgments, I'll come to that before closure of the session. Now, this Keshavananda Bharati gave us this doctrine of basic structure, which effectively means, though the Constitution can be amended in terms of Article 368 as provided in the Constitution, the Supreme Court held that in that power of amendment, the legislature, the parliament, cannot completely take away the basic structure of the Constitution. This is the essence of it. Now, as there is a march of law, there is also doctrines which are getting the imagination of the judiciary, or doctrines which are coming up more for consideration. And one such doctrine which you can look at is doctrine of constitutional morality. There is huge amount of jurisprudence on all these things as to judgments. The latest judgments, see in the case of Puttaswamy or the Aadhar and so many other things, you can have a reading which will give you insights as to these doctrines. The Honorable Supreme Court has also provided for a large amount of jurisprudence on the power of lawmakers to amend the Constitution under Article 368 of the Constitution. As I said, Keshavananda Bharati case is a guiding principle on the point as of now, and which has been rendered by the largest bench as far as Supreme Court is concerned as of date. Now, one small thought process when you think about these constitutional judgments is that how it evolved. You could have seen that when there had been challenges as regarding personal liberties, when the Constitution guaranteed a personal right to freedom, right to personal liberty, and when there is a question of certain enactment interfering with that, like detention laws, you get a few judgments on that, and which in turn resulted to the amendments also. So the Part 3 provisions, which guaranteed certain freedoms, were amended, putting in certain restrictions, which set reasonable restrictions within the purview of public policy of the state. Likewise, certain rights, take the case of a right to property, which was once a part of the fundamental right guaranteed under Part 3. Then challenges came, all the Zamindari abolition, all these laws, everything, titles, where everything were on the question of this guarantee of property being part of Part 3. Then amendment came by which this right to property is now become a constitutional right under Article 300A and being taken away from the fundamental rights. So like individual liberties and challenges to rights guaranteed gave you a lot of jurisprudence. So the entire constitutional judgments are on the point. Either the freedom which is being guaranteed, and if there are reasonable restrictions, challenges to that. Take the case of Maneka Gandhi. Then other guarantees like right to property or right to education, right to religious beliefs, right to minorities, all these things, when there are certain questions which arise as to infringement of these rights or seeking to enforce these rights, which gave you again a series of judgments. Then one another area is that the very power of the parliament to amend, to make laws as well as to amend the constitution. So that is where in a series of judgments you ultimately ended up with the Keshavananda Bharati case. Because at one point of time, Supreme Court had also held that the parliament has power to amend the constitution as it feels. This was one law. Now subsequently it becomes that by a larger judges bench that has been overruled, and they said that yes, there is a power to amend, but such power can be subject to judicial review as well as can be exercised in a manner that it does not affect the basic structure of the constitution. And more emphatically, it said that it should not in any manner affect the fundamental rights guaranteed under Part 3. This is only a broad view as far as the constitutional judgments which came on the constitutional remedies which I sought to put across to you. Now, concludingly, as I said, constitutional remedies are the lifeline of the legal remedies of a democratic society, where rule of law has to prevail for a pluralist society to achieve its objects of constitutional goals. Now, the first remedy which I said is the common law remedy, which is established such rule of law as a due process in the administration of justice. Now, however, as I said, over the years, many reliefs which were part of now become statutory remedies. Take the case of a money recovery suits by financial institution banks, which were part of common law remedy as a civil suit. Now, over the period of time, we don't know what happens. The answer is that people say that there is huge delay in the administration of justice, or there is huge delay in disposal of these matters. Results are not forthcoming, and therefore specialized laws are required. So therefore, that common law remedy became a statutory remedy by way of special enactments. So over the years, many reliefs which were common law remedies have taken the shape of statutory remedies, and this trend is on the upward. This is my view as a conclusion to this session. Thank you, friends, very much for having been with me for this 70-75 minutes of time. I think I have shared my thoughts on a broad view, and hope that this gives you some kind of insight as to how to look about for the remedies. Thank you, one and all. And if any of my friends is ready to clarify certain things, I am welcome to it. If want certain clarifications, and within my possibility, if I am able to do, I will do so. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Om Prakash, for taking us through the remedies that are available under law. There are a couple of questions that have cropped. Mr. Shivakumar has asked, what is the scope and extent of jurisdiction of civil court in the cases where the secured creditor overriding DRT limits? Any instance of which take away jurisdiction of DRT?
On this question, the jurisprudence has evolved very, very clearly. DRTs had being a special enactment, there is a specific bar of civil courts. So that, to some extent, we had instances saying that if there is a right of property by way of inheritance or right of property by way of joint family rights, and right to property which falls outside the scope of a security interest created, were all questions which had been subject matter of jurisprudence. But ultimately, if you look at one final judgment of Supreme Court, I think in the case of Hiralal, I can give you the citation later, which in fact specifically referred to section 6 of the CPC and said, you don't have that remedy. So therefore, today the position is that a jurisdiction as regarding security interests, secured assets, anything which comes within that scope, anything which in part of it, once an enforcement happens, is only before the specialized tribunals, named the DRTs, and the civil court jurisdiction is barred.
Thank you. Another question has cropped up. What is the place accorded to equity in common law? This was raised by Mr. Rajendra Kumar.
As far as the judicial administrative system in India is concerned, we did not recognize these equitable remedies as a common law remedy. This is available in the courts in UK. Legal remedy and equitable remedy are two different branches as far as UK laws are concerned, are administered by different courts. What we did is that certain equitable remedies have been made as part of common law remedies and recognized by the principles more particularly and specifically. As I said, the remedy of injunction, the remedy of specific performance was seen as an equitable remedy and being part of it. Therefore, equity does not find a place when there is specific provision of law. Is the settled for legal position as far as Indian law is concerned.
Mr. Ilangovan has raised his hand. Just a moment, I will unmute him.
I can take it if it is not something on DRP and surface.
I don't know. Mr. Ilangovan is there.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Ilangovan.
Sir, this is with regard to our commentary on this common law remedy. Now, almost all the common law remedies are converted into a special statute, one way or other. The reason assigned is only the delay. What are the effective steps that it can be taken? Even the remedy can be taken to come within the provision of common law remedy. Instead of legislating so many laws or specialized laws for different subjects, altogether it also ends in a sad story that it also ends in delay. Even you can say that SARFAESI, DRT Act, now IPC.
Yes.
The definite course of action ends in this only delay. Instead of it, there cannot be any cure for a common law remedy which is accessible to all, sir. What kind of remedies it should be? You are advising.
I see it can be seen in two different parts. One is that in cases of economic legislations, we don't have much of a hope. In cases of economic legislation, what I find is that tribunalization is the order of day. Any more special enactments on these economic legislations is also the order of day. And please see the judgments of Supreme Court in upholding IBC or upholding PMLA or upholding DRT, SARFAESI Act and all. More particularly, the recent trends, you can see that Supreme Court has gone to the extent of even saying that the legislature should be permitted to experiment. Let them experiment and let them do. And they have gone to the extent of saying that no more scope of adjudication. Take the case of IBC. Even the lawyer's skill of adjudication is lost. It is only now looked at, there is a debt default, then further process continues. So therefore, on economic legislation, this is the order of day. At least as lawyers or as advocates, as persons who are holding the mantle of this legal profession, if we are effectively looking forward for all other areas, then I think these common law remedies can be strengthened. One thing which I find is that of late, you can find that there is a very good positive response in terms of disposals by the civil courts. We can even hear words from some high court judges or even reported in some judgments that civil courts are doing far, far better in terms of adjudication than the specialized tribunals. These words are coming up here and there. And of course, you are aware that there is a very big challenge to this tribunalization because it erodes the independence of judiciary. This repeatedly Madras Bar Association is also fighting before the Supreme Court. So on that context, my views is that there is some hope if you strengthen the civil courts, if you strengthen the adjudicatory mechanism in civil courts, if you strengthen the disposal rates and the quality of disposal in the civil courts, we can stop the flow of trend towards special laws and tribunalization. But this I am telling with a word of caution that as regarding economic laws, the trend is the other way.
Mr. CSK Satish wants to share his thought. Just a moment, I'll unmute him.
This should put me into some comfort.
But where is he? Yes, here he is. Satish.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Good evening, Satish. Yes.
Loud and clear.
Thank you, sir. You have encapsulated all the legal remedies available under common law, statutory and constitutional remedies. It was very, very informative and it was refreshing us during this lockout period. Sir, now I have one thought to be shared.
Yes.
Just I want to share my thoughts to all our friends also, so that they can also come out with a suggestion. See, regarding all the remedies, the common law remedies, statutory remedy, constitutional remedies, you have narrated to us. Now, I feel that still there are some situations where a person may not be able to get justice in all these three forums, in three modes. Take for instance where a person is wrongly convicted and sentenced, and cases are not uncommon where some unfortunate victims have served a sentence and later it was found that they are innocent. In such of those cases, to my little knowledge, sir, till now, either in CRPC or in other tortious liability laws, we don't have specific legislation. Because, of course, under CRPC, there is one provision, some 358, which says that for groundlessly arresting, you can give some compensation, some 100 rupees, something like that. But in such cases, just I want to have your thoughts also, and I leave it to my friends also to give their thoughts. That what would be the effective remedy, sir? How can he wrongly convicted, and later it was found to the court and adjudicated that yes, you have been wrongly convicted, and how he can claim his right or justice from the court?
Yeah, what you said is very, very true and a very good thought process also. I have just three things to add. I am not in a position to answer you as it is, but I will add 3 points. One is that so far as regarding this area of where a wrongful prosecution happens, a person has a sufferance because of certain acts, High Courts and Supreme Court has also stepped in cases under Article 226 and 32, though it is very, very minimal. So that jurisprudence is available where you can approach that. So when I said about these constitutional remedies, this is one area which has to be explored. This is there. They have granted certain remedies by awarding compensation, all those things. Then secondly, there is still a scope and a common law remedy for wrongful prosecution. Damages for wrongful prosecution, compensation for wrongful prosecution is still available, but not much of explored, and we didn't get much of a relief. In fact, the other day in one of the sessions when Siddharth Luthra was speaking about this area, I asked him as to what remedies are there. Then he only referred to one case of the scientist Nambi Rajan of Kerala, who petitioned the Supreme Court, and after so much of years he got some relief by way of a compensation. But still, many have suffered by the time. This is on the second. There is still something. Thirdly, which I interestingly read, is that in a very recent times, within weeks' time, I need to explore that. I found a news item which said that a person has petitioned the Supreme Court asking for enactment of a law for this wrongful prosecution. This happened within this 4 or 5 days' time. So there is some thought process which is going on, but ultimately a court cannot direct a law to be enacted. But Supreme Court has issued notice in that matter. So let us see what comes out of these 3 points only. I just wanted to add to what Satish said. And I also have to recognize the fact that my session as regarding Article 142 was triggered by some thoughts by Satish, as well as he had sent me some materials. So I had taken out some of my points as regarding Article 142 from what was shared by Satish. I thank him before this one.
Just to add few things to Satish, if time permits, and the resource person's person permits, lot number of suits are being filed claiming compensation for the failed family planning operations. Lot suits are filed, and a few second appeals are also pending. So other remedy is to file a suit seeking compensation. There are a lot of compliments pouring in still as you speak, sir. Then Mr. Motilal has raised a question. In common law remedies, we are having tight balance and checks, especially. The human error by lower judiciary can be rectified as such, having the first and second appeals. Thereafter, we can also invoke inherent powers of higher judiciary. But in statutory remedies, either we are having one appeal remedy or no appeal. It is not amounting to curtailment of rights, equity, etc.
Yes, to some extent it is correct. In cases of statutory remedies, your regular right of defense or regular right as regarding establishing a fact by evidence are all getting defeated. That is true. Likewise, as you said, appeal remedies are also restricted to one forum. But that is where we may have to explore a lot on the constitutional remedies. The invocation of Article 226 before the High Court is in fact a correctional jurisdiction. As and when these tribunals commit certain errors, as and when the administration of justice suffers, the High Courts are bound to step in. We need to develop a lot of jurisprudence and we need to fight. And I feel that with an effective bar, this can be a achievable thing.
Yes, sir. Mr. Sundar Mohan wants to share his thoughts. 1 minute. Sir, Sundar Mohan, sir.
Just for
Good evening, Sundar.
good evening, wonderful session, Om sir. It was very enlightening. You had in 45 minutes said about all the remedies that is available. Just want to add, so far as the prosecution is concerned, what Satish raised. See, you have a tort called malicious prosecution.
Right.
It's a common law remedy, and in fact, there are suits filed claiming compensation for malicious prosecution. The common law remedy that is available. Plus, the court which accuses the accused can also award compensation. That is also there in CRPC. So these are, of course, very minimal remedies. So in order to pursue a separate remedy under suit, it's a long-drawn process. The moment a person comes out of the clutches of the court, the first thing he thinks of is to not to step into the court again. But you ask him to get back to court by filing a suit for malicious prosecution is a difficult thing. So practically it is not applicable. But I have seen suits being filed for malicious prosecution. Then you will have for arrests. If there are wrongful arrests made, wrongful remands made, then Arnesh Kumar provides for a remedy. You can move the High Court for contempt, and you can seek departmental action against the magistrates for wrongful remand if they violate any of the provisions under Section 41 relating to arrest and remand. So these are some, and if you will have to see one more judgment, Rutal Shah's case, where they awarded compensation for a lawyer who was arrested pursuant to a warrant. What happened was he had recalled the warrant even before the warrant could be executed.
Okay.
So on a holiday, he was wrongfully arrested, and then he moved the court saying that these people didn't check whether I had recalled. In spite of my telling that the warrant is recalled, they arrested me and then put me to shame. The Supreme Court stepped in. Under Article 226, they awarded compensation to him. And then they said it's an interim measure. He can still move the court for compensation for wrongful arrest, and then this will be adjusted. So these are some of the remedies that we have. The practical application is.
Thank you, Sundarman. Very nice information. I was not aware about certain things. Ultimately, a robust bar, what is required? If you are more empowered on all these things, what I look at to my friends is that we are the ultimate persons who have to provide for all these things. If there is a robust bar, it is definitely going to help in a big way.
1 second, Mr. Rajendra Kumar has raised his hand.
At the turn of last, am I audible?
No. Yeah, just now.
Yeah. Last century, at the beginning of last century, 2 youngsters were convicted by a very high court of UK. Then one David Yallop conducted an independent investigation and wrote a book also. Based on the book, the case was revisited and they both were let off with 1 million compensation. This thought came to me, that's why I'm just sharing it.
Thank you.
In fact, in India also, the compensation has been awarded. I remember appearing in a secondary where a police officer was directed to pay compensation.
In fact, just now in the chat box, I got a chat post saying that for wrongful remand also, a victim was granted ₹1 lakh by our Honorable High Court, and that has to be deducted from the salary of judicial officer.
That is what I said. We had a few writ petitions on this where reliefs are granted.
Yes. I think this marks the end of the session. I just now call upon Mr. Murthy to say the vote of thanks. Murthy.
Thanks. I thank you very much, the speaker of this session, Mr. Om Prakash, Senior Advocate. And in fact, I must confess that the topic initially looks like it's a law student's topic, And when our senior counsel started with the legal maxim, ubi just ibi remedium, I thought it's going to be our law college class. And after 2-3 minutes, when our speaker took us to the three main remedies, common law remedies, statutory remedies, and constitutional remedies, then it took the momentum. And then I think every one of us will come to a conclusion that how important this topic is. And this is the foundation and fundamental for our law practice. And today's session is very much enlightening and also ignites the thought process of many of us. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the study circle, I thank the speaker, Mr. Om Prakash. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.